Okay, shalom. Welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Korach. Parshat Korach, if I was to give you a short synopsis, Parshat Korach speaks about not just an individual who goes by the name of Korach, but actually of an entire episode. It's one that's very fundamental in the legacy of Moshe and his leadership of the Jewish people. Korach, to give you a synopsis, Korach basically challenged the authority of Moshe, the authority and the, power of the kahuna, of the priesthood, specifically the high priest Aaron, Moshe's brother. But in truth, as Moshe told him, he wasn't just challenging Moshe as an individual. He wasn't just challenging Aaron as a person. Rather, essentially, he was going against Hashem himself. Because it wasn't Moshe who decided that he's Moshe, and it wasn't Aaron who decided that he's Aaron. Or it wasn't Moshe that appointed Aaron, it was God who did so. And the sad ending to the story, of course, is that not only he didn't get what he thought he would, in other words, not only he didn't achieve anything positive, but sadly he and all the people that stood up against Moshe lost their lives. And in his case, in the case of Datan and Abiram, the two rebel rousers, which we've already encountered all the way back in the beginning of Moshe's leadership, in the beginning of Moshe's legacy, namely all the way back in Egypt. Remember those two people that Moshe saw fighting in the street and they snitched on him? Those are the same people that appear in this Parsha, the same individuals. And they
were the one who commented, who make you the leader of the Jew.
They and their families, that's Korach, Datan, and Abiram, and their families, including little children, lost their lives and were swallowed into the ground. Okay? And we're not going to go into, obviously, to the details of the Parsha, but I just want to do, as I said, always, and we call this class the practical Parsha. So always to glean some practical, either halachot, either laws, or practical guidelines, guideposts in our lives as Jews, as people. Let's start with the beginning. The name of the Parsha. The name of the Parsha is Korach. Now, the obvious reason why the name of the Parsha is Korach is because it's one of the first words in the Parsha. So it's almost like just an identification mark, right? So it would seem. So one would suggest. However, that can't be the case. Or that certainly is not exclusively the only reason. Why not? Number one, what is the first word in the Parsha? Vayikach. And he took. Meaning, he took a side. Okay? He took an approach. So if we would identify the Parsha with the verb Vayikach, that would be sufficient in separating this Parsha from any other Parsha and exclusively identifying this Parsha. Because there isn't any other Parsha in the Torah that is referred to, that is called with the title Vayikach, and he took. That would be enough. But that's not it. The real question here is, there's a rule, and we already encountered it way back as a teaching in the book of Genesis. The sages teach us, Shem Risha'im Yirkav. Quote, the name of the wicked should rot. It lives in infamy. You should not really even call the wicked by name. Till today, there are those that even refrain of naming the terrible tyrant Hitler by name. Okay? In inner Jewish circles, many times they will refer to him as the Yemach Shemonik. Yemach Shemo means may his name be eradicated. So he is the person whose name should be eradicated. You don't even have to say his personal name. You don't even have to say his family name. Everybody knows what you're talking about. Okay? When it comes to some of the greatest rebel rousers in the history of Judaism, and there's one in particular that we refer to him as, we don't refer to him by name. We don't. We refer to him as Oto Ha'ish, that man, that person. We don't even want to say his name. So the question is, Korach, did he end up being righteous or wicked? Wicked. Terrible.
Very wicked.
In fact, as we'll explore a little later, the wickedness and then the nature of what he committed is so severe that it actually even serves as an exception in God's book of rules. Whereas ordinarily, little children are not punished for the sins of the fathers. In this case, because of machloket, because of the discord that he created, because of his opposition to peace, because of his creation of this disparity, it's so severe that it's like the worst cancer. It doesn't discriminate. It kills even the best, even the innocent. So how then do we name an entire Parsha in the Torah? An entire Parsha. We call it Korach. Now you may say, well, it's just a superficial name. It's just an identifier. That's not the case. A name of a Parsha actually even has, or could have, some very strong legal ramification. Such as, I'll give you an example, when it's used in a document. You see, today, if we're writing a document, if it's a civil document, so you have to use the identifier which is typically used in the legal system. So that may be, let's say if it's today, January whatever, 2019 and so on. Not January, forgive me, July, right? July 3rd, 2019. You use the day of the week. However, not that long ago, now again, we're not accustomed to it, but not that long ago, if you go into museums, you'll see it in documents. You would also list the amount of years to such and such, the reign of such and such, meaning the king, or the monarch, or the ruling family, the ruling party, and so on. In Jewish law, when we actually put a date to a document, especially when it's a very important and crucial document, such as a marriage document, a ketubah, or even more important and more severe, and more, I'll use the word more delicate, because it needs to have absolute precision, and that is a get, a divorce decree, a divorce document. It has to be so precise that if it's not, then it renders the entire document invalid. Thus, the entire divorce is not a divorce. Thus, the people are still married, and God forbid if that woman goes and remarries, she is now a married woman who has committed adultery. My point is that when we do write the date of this document, it's typical also to write the day of the week to which Parsha. Because remember, we read the Parsha on Shabbat. Shabbat is the culmination of the week. Shabbat is the last day of the week. It's the seventh day of the week. Thus, you would, let's say, write, if it was today, you would write Wednesday of Parshat Korach. So Wednesday of the week of Korach. So we have an identifier of what day and what week it is. And then we would write, in today's case, it would be the first day of Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, which is the 30th day of Sivan, the year Tafshin Ayin Tet, 5779. So you see how this is so powerful, the name of the Parsha, that if I misquoted the Parsha, and I wrote, let's say, another name, it wouldn't be identifying the Parsha correctly. Thus, it would be an invalid document. So this brings us back to the question, how could we name a Parsha after such a wicked person? After a person who has done such terrible harm to himself and to his family and the others that he managed to instigate and schlep along with him. The answer is, and this is a very important lesson and a perspective on how and what really we are meant to really think about one another and the attitude we're supposed to have towards each other as far as Judaism is concerned. In practice, meaning in actuality, and that's what's been proven in this Parsha, yes, the truth is that there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy. There's the leader, you have the high priest, you have the rabbi, you have the teacher, you have the moel, you have the father, mother, there's the dean of the school. Everything, there's a hierarchy. What was Korach's argument? What was Korach's argument? The core of his argument. If you look at verse 3, look what it says. They gathered against Moshe and Aaron and they said to them, "You have taken too much for yourselves. Since the entire congregation are holy and Hashem is in their midst, why do you raise yourself above the assembly of God?" Those are the words that he used. What his true meaning behind it was, what his true intent was, obviously, okay, at least the way it manifested itself was incorrect. But at the core of his argument, meaning at the root of the argument, Korach is actually righteous. That means when we get into detail, when we study the Parsha and understand step by step what happened in detail, when we unscramble it, the story, it's definitely, we have many lessons, as we're going to soon find out. We have many lessons that teach us how bad and how destructive his arguments were, and certainly his implementation of his ideology, his way of thinking. But in the core of it, the statement that he made, the root of it, that says we are all equal, from Moshe to the simplest Jew, from the eldest Jew that's 119 and 364 days old to the newborn baby, he's right. You can't argue with that. And in that sense, as in a general sense, when we just name the Parsha, naming it in a general term without getting into detail, Korach is great. His argument was true. It's so true that he does not represent the epitome of evil. We can still call him by name. And indeed, we can actually even pay tribute to him, at least to the core of his argument, by naming the entire Parsha after him. To give you, as we're approaching the 25th yard sign of the Rabbi, to give you from the Rebbe's words, perspective from the Rebbe's, just the insight. Just sometimes the words can be so simple, but they're so deep, they're so powerful. Many, many years ago, somebody who was coming a little closer to Judaism, but not yet totally in tune with all the teachings of Judaism, he wasn't there yet. And something that really bothered him as he started to dabble and he started to study, and he saw that, wow, there's a Moses and there's an Aaron and there's all the great rabbis, all the great teachers and all the great prophets and prophetesses. His question to the Rebbe was, am I significant? In other words, what importance does the regular person play in Judaism? And the Rebbe told him, imagine if we were in this room and there were 9 Moseses there in this room. 9 people like Moses. There wouldn't be a million. If a Jew like you or me, the Rebbe put himself on the same level, but if just an ordinary Jew like you or me walked in, now they have a million, now they have a quorum. Now whether we understand it or not, but the fact is that when you have a quorum, when you have 10 souls in one room, regardless of who they are, you now have that presence of God that calls for or allows for a much heightened level of kedusha, of holiness, of exposure of holiness, such as reading the Torah, the repetition of the Amidah, and so on and so forth. And that took care of business for him. And that really, if to sum up, that's what Korach was saying. Korach was saying is at the core, and we have to recognize this, and we have to remember this, that after all the protocol, and after all the different levels of hierarchy that we have, and we have not because they're superficial, because we created them. Halacha states so. Jewish law dictates that there is, you come into a synagogue, that there's a decorum, that there's the cantor, that there is the rabbi, that there is the person who's leading, the people who are chanting, the people who are responding. Whatever it is, yes, halacha dictates that. Someone's called up to the Torah, he's the one who got the honor. He's the one who leads the Torah, the one who stands on the side of the Torah. That's all true. We can't do away with all of that. In other words, we cannot, because we believe in this fundamental, create what the communists wanted to create, is that everybody's equal and there's no difference between one another. There is a difference. There is a difference in practical approach, in practice. Practical means in practice. In actuality, you cannot compare the scholar to the simpleton. The scholar does have, so much knowledge, and the simpleton doesn't. So obviously, if you have a matter that needs to be dealt with or an issue, you're not going to go to the simpleton that hasn't a clue of Jewish law. You have to go to somebody who's well versed. If you need someone to chant the prayers, you're obviously going to go to somebody who has a good voice and somebody who understands the prayers, versus somebody who has a hoarse voice and doesn't study the prayers or doesn't know how to read. It's obvious that in practice you have the different levels of hierarchy. But in the core of it all, in the general sense, that means before we get into detail, before we read the Parsha in detail, Korach. Know that his thinking was, and he was the one who highlighted it. It's not to say that Moshe didn't think that way. It's not to say that Aaron didn't think that way. But he's the one who brought it to the forefront. He's the one who brings it to our attention. He does get the credit for it. And that's a very important lesson.
You know why he got punished for it?
Because he acted on it. He's acted on it. So it's the equivalent of, imagine I say we're all equal, right? And therefore, what's yours is mine. What's yours is mine, esoterically, in essence, may be very true. But what yours is mine, and I now cross your threshold and start taking your private property, you call the police. Make sense? If I act on it, okay? Now, in this case, the case of Judaism is spiritually speaking, it's not just a theory. It's actually true. And I illustrated to you, I demonstrated to you how it's true. Again, you can have 9 of the greatest Jews to ever live. Moshe, Rabbi Akiva, Aaron, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and name another 2 or 3. Elijah the prophet and King David. You don't have a minion. It walks in a guy like me, a little guy like me, big mouth. Now you have a minion. You understand? How do I compare to them? Not even like an ant to a buffalo. You understand? Not even like a cockroach to an elephant. But I'm a Jew. I have an neshama. I have a soul. And that's what Korach was saying. And that is true. Okay? But now if I start to give my opinion and go, well, look, if I can count for this minion, then my opinion counts, and I'm going to tell wait. Are you Moses? No. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
We're all, it's like I heard this rabbi, maybe it applies here, but a rabbi, he gives an example. He'll give an example of something similar to this idea, where, something can be so true, but if you take it in a very simplistic and practical manner, it becomes the opposite of good. It becomes the opposite of truth. So he says, when do you not invite your guests back? When you tell them, feel at home, and they actually do. That's from Rabbi Friedman. Okay? So that is the point I'm trying to bring out. When you said feel at home, you really, really meant it. But the moment they go into your closet and start taking things, now we have a problem. You're not coming back here. You know, we're no longer friends. So what, did you mean it? Did you not mean it? Is it true or is it not? I meant it to be true. But remember that there's still, law and order. There's still a protocol here. I'm the person who pays rent here. I'm the person who owns the stuff. I want you to feel comfortable because, yes, we are friends and you are my guest and I want you to feel at home. But this is not your home. So, in that sense, I don't know if it absolutely applies here. I'm using the same idea. Korach is right. And it's more true than that, me saying to somebody, feel at home, because I don't really mean it fully. I just mean it.
Make you feel good.
To make you feel good. Okay? But this is actually true. At the core of it, we're all the same. But you still can't compare the guy in the street that knows nothing to Moses. You still can't compare the two when it comes in terms of the laws of giving honor and giving respect and so on and so forth. There isn't a comparison. But in terms of the fundamental, essential comparison for one Jew to another, Korach is 100% right. Let's move on. So what happens? If you look at the first verse, and what we can learn from this first verse, it says Korach took. What does he mean he took? He took his opinion. He took himself to a side. He took, really connotates, he created division. He created discord. Korach was the son of Yitzhar, who was the son of Kahat, who was the son of Levi, and Datan and Aviram, the children of Eliav, and On, the son of Peles, the sons of Reuven. So they're from the tribe of Reuven. He is what? From the tribe of Levi. Okay, he's a Levite. He's actually a first cousin with Moshe. Okay, remember the biggest problems come from within the family usually. It's always been that way. Look at the first two brothers. Right? Talking about brotherly love. Anyway, what happened here? And what can we learn from this? The sages tell us, the sages remark on this, Oy lirasha v'oy lishchina. Woe is to the wicked one, and woe is to his neighbor. Korach, practically speaking, he had a beef. He had a problem with Moshe and Aaron. He was wrong. But at least there was some legitimacy to it. At least if you try to go into his mind. There was something that he felt, or he thought, he hoped that he can achieve. Something that he can get here. What is that? He's within the Levite tribe. He's a Levi. His argument, to put it in plain simple words, was, Moshe, you're the leader. You were appointed as the leader. Aaron was the high priest. I'm next in line. I'm next over here in the hierarchy. I should be getting the next post, which is to be in charge of the Levites. And instead, Moshe skipped over him and went to a younger cousin and appointed him. It wasn't Moshe's doing. It was because, obviously, it was dictated by God. But he got jealous about that. So, if he was to win, if his strategy, if his argument was to gain traction and he was to win, what would have happened? He would be appointed either as the leader of the Levites, or as he said, I want to be the high priest. Okay? But at least he has a chance. He's in the tribe of the Levites. What exactly are the people from the tribe of Reuven
that's it.
doing it? How exactly did they fall into this argument? How do they fall into this picture? Where do they come from? What are they fighting about? So, number one, as I said, the sages tell us, learn from this. They were neighbors with Korach's family. Specifically this part of the tribe of Reuven. Now let me explain. If you have just a general picture, general image, and we'll use the bima as an example. The Mimna was the center of the encampment of the Jewish people. Now understand, just imagine, it turns out more or less that the entire camp was about 8 miles each way. 8 miles by 8 miles, something like that, like a small city. A city, I mean, you talk about several million people camped out together. Could have been even more, but more or less, I think it was 12, in Talmudical terms, it says it was 12 mil by 12 mil, which I guess is something more or less, if I want to count, 7 to 8 miles by 7 to 8 miles. Okay? No high-rise buildings, no skyscrapers, all in tents. Okay? Maybe crammed together, but they were there. So it says there were 3 machanot, there were 3 camps, there were 3 encampments. The middle one was called Machaneh Shekhinah, which is the camp of God. Shekhinah means God's dwelling place, which is the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Immediately around it, the circle around it, was called Machaneh Leviah, the camp of the Levites. You had Moses, then you had the Kahat family, which Korach is Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kahat. Okay? Remember, Moshe was the son of Amram, the son of Kahat. So they both shared grandfathers. Okay? So just Moshe and Aaron were the 2 sons of the elder son of Kahat, and Korach was of the next son. Okay? Then you had the Gershonites, and the Merari. Okay? So the 3, what happened? The outer camp, which is called Machaneh Yisrael, the camp of the Jewish people, had 4 sections, and each section consisted of 3 tribes. So the Reuvenites, and the 3 tribes were like one, and then going out was the next tribe and the next tribe. So the Reuvenites, the people from the tribe of Reuven, were closest to Korach and his family, and they became influenced by them. And this is very, very interesting, because although one would actually put these type of rules, this type of talk, not so much into the category of law, the do's and don'ts. One would typically feel like putting them in more the category of ideology or perspective. But it's interesting that Maimonides, the Rambam, in his monumental work of law, which consists of 14 books, the first of which is called, has Hilchot Yisodei HaTorah, which is the laws, the fundamental laws of the Torah. Just, what we believe in, what we don't believe in, what is the fundamentals of our belief. And then he has what's called Hilchot De'ot. De'ot is perspective about how to live one's life. And there he explains that because the human being is a social being, the human being is influenced by his or her surroundings, therefore it is incumbent on any God-fearing person to live in the midst of good people, to live in an environment which is conducive and complementary for one who's serving God, who wants to be a good moral person. So he says, and if you cannot find such a place, he says, it even means that you should distance yourself and better live alone in an isolated place, like find yourself a spot on top of a mountain and live far away, live secluded, but live far away from the wicked people. Why? Because even though right now you're righteous and you're good and you're moral, but living in their midst, living in that environment has an effect on you. And here you can see clearly an absolute example of it, where this is not just a nice theory, a nice perspective, but it actually translates into law, because the Rambam in that book, Maimonides, in the book of laws, it's not just book of theory or ideology or philosophy. It's not a book of Jewish philosophy. It's a book of law. And in that book of law, he gives you this approach, this philosophy, this attitude of where you should and you shouldn't live. Now, there's no list of criteria, okay, such a place, mark off, but the general idea is that you need to be in a healthy environment. And just like this is true for our physical health, okay, medically speaking, if you're in a bad environment, if there's mold, if there's something in the air, it has an effect on you. If the water is not good, whatever it is, even if the air is not good, is polluted, it can have a terrible effect on you. Spiritually speaking, morally speaking, ethically speaking, being in an environment that has contaminated air, spiritually speaking, is also bad for you. And here we see this example. So this is another very powerful one. As we continue, I just want to fast forward. Again, we're just sharing just some points of the Parsha, just some practical applications, things that we can take away with us.
But also his wife,
Mm-hmm.
his wife also pushed him to be against Moshe.
So you talk coming from a woman. I wasn't going to broach the subject.
but
Now that it
He
came
had
from
bad
you-
counsel from his wife.
So
it is
well, it was. So let's talk about that, because this is actually a very important fundamental in Judaism. Not the wife issue. I
remember that I wrote a drash on this subject.
I want to step back.
Environment modified behavior.
Right. But I want to take a step back. To actually learn a little bit about this, who this Korach individual was, and how this relates to our life. In other words, remember, just learning about one's ills, just talking about someone else's failures is not a virtue in the Torah. But when we can learn something from it, when it really can enhance our connection to Hashem and our experiences living here on this earth and being better people, then it actually has a virtue in talking about it. Otherwise, we're just speaking negatively about someone else and their failures. The first thing that Jew does in the morning, the first thing that every individual should do in the morning, is we get up and we say, thank you. We say thank you. Every single time we pray, every single time we stand before God, before we eat, after we eat, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And really, if you think about it sometimes, I mean, God, I'm sure he has a good self-esteem. He doesn't need my thank you every 10 minutes. In other words, he knows that he's doing a good job. He doesn't need me to remind him. So what is it exactly? What is really behind this? I'm not getting into the Kabbalah. And just think about it psychologically speaking. What is really behind this? What is it really telling us, the person who's saying thank you? Because remember, God doesn't need it. Whether I said thank you or I didn't say thank you, I'm sure he knows very good and well if he's doing a good job or not. It's for us. And in God's kindness, he allowed us, he gave us the ability to say thank you so we can learn to be grateful. Not for his sake, but for our sake. And one of the most important things in a psychologically healthy life is to be grateful. Mm-hmm. That is not to say that everybody has a perfect life. That's not just a cliche saying, we all got problems. Mm-hmm. We all do. But thank God, and especially today's day and age, we all have a lot of good things. Okay? We don't think about it. We don't attribute much greatness to it. But just imagine, even every time you go home from work, or you go to work, how are you going? How are you traveling?
Right.
In a car, most likely, right? Think about it. You don't even have to smell horses, okay? And not the dung of the horses every time you go to work, okay? And you certainly don't have to be exposed to the environment. It starts raining, you put your wipers on, right? It's hot here in Florida, you put on the air conditioner. It's cold in the north, you put on the heater, right? Car's not working well, you get upset, and you go to the mechanic, you fix it, you buy a new car, okay? And it's not like even when I was growing up, that everyone I knew had clunkers, old jalopies, okay, right? Today, come on, what's the worst car you see on the road today? I mean, you almost have to deliberately look for a bad card to have a bad card. I mean, come on, it's another couple of years old, another couple of this, so it doesn't have Bluetooth. Oh, I'm sorry. It's suffering. It's terrible. Terrible. No? I mean, I guess he's the only guy I know that's driving a car that's half my age. Right? Because he likes to tinker with it, whatever. But that's a choice. It's a choice. But the point is, come on. Right? But most people aren't grateful. They get the car and they go, wow, look what God has given me. Because we just become so accustomed. It just becomes so cheap. Now you think, so what's really so bad with that? So why do I have to say thank you? Why do I really have to say thank you? And if I don't say thank you one day, what's going to happen? So let's examine. Let's take a little look at Korach's bio. Let's visit his bio. First of all, his lineage. This is a man who's from the most prominent family in the Jewish people. Not only is he does he come from a prominent lineage. And he says, I have a pedigree. But even where he lived, I just described to you the three camps. Even where he lived called for prominence. He was a distinguished individual. Directly distinguished by God. But before we get to that, or besides that, Korach was the richest man ever, talking about the richest private citizen ever that lived on the face of the earth. I'll tell you exactly how it came about and how this happened. Remember the story with Joseph? Mm-hmm. Joseph was the ruler of Egypt. Mm-hmm. Joseph was the only one who had food, who had access to any sort of nutrition at a time when the world was starving. Well, I'm just saying the world, I mean all of known civilization at the time was experiencing a severe, not a regular, a severe famine. They all came to Egypt. Even the sons of Jacob came to Egypt. They all came to Egypt to do what? To purchase food. Well, first they came to Egypt, they purchased whatever currency. The currency was gold, silver, copper coins, and it wasn't like the currency we have today, which is just empty paper dollars. Okay, but it was real currency. But that can only last you that long. So then they came with their diamonds. They came with their jewelry. They came with their gems. They came with the pearls. They came with everything and anything that had any value. That all ended up in the coffers of Egypt. In fact, in the end of the book of Genesis, it even tells us that afterwards, they came and they gave up their land. Here, take our land. What's the land worth? We need to eat. We need to survive. We're dying. So now, the government, meaning the monarchy, the Egyptians, they owned everything. All the world's wealth, literally, was in Egypt, under the direction of Joseph. In fact, they even went further. That later they said, just you own us. We'll sell ourselves as slaves to you. What's our life worth? We're about to die. We'll rather be your servants and have what to eat. And later he allotted land to different people, and I guess land ownership started again. That's after the famine subsided and after they became blessed again. What did he do with all those riches? Understand that all the gold, silver, anything of value, diamonds, jewelry, gems, everything from the entire world was all accumulated into Egypt. So the Midrash tells us that he divided it into three. 1/3 he actually sank in the Nile. I guess if you want to do an exploration, you have to know which exactly is the Nile. It's gone. For whatever reason, he was like, this has to be gone, no access to anyone. 1/3 was left in Egypt for the disposal of the government, of the people. And that's why Egypt was the richest country in the world. And that explains how they dominated the entire world. And that makes gives us a perspective on how severe the enslavement in Egypt was, because the Jews know where to go. There was nowhere to run. It wasn't like you're going to go to their enemy or to a kingdom or a nation that's not under their jurisdiction. Everybody was under jurisdiction. Everybody was under their rulership. What did he do with the other third, with the last third? It says that he buried it. He hid it away somewhere. I don't recall now for what purpose, what his intent was. But the fact is he buried it. Korach figured out, about 200 years later, Korach figures out where that treasure is. And it becomes his. He finds it. Finders keepers. So Korach, you'll agree with me, was the richest person to ever live. Because even today when you say, Zuckerberg, or you say
Bill Gates
or whatever, they own a lot of money. But it's not a third of the world's wealth, of civilization's wealth. This was a third of all possible wealth. In fact, I would say even more, because being that 1/3 was totally lost. So this is half of civilization's wealth was in his hands. Can you imagine how rich this person was? Now, let's continue. So we just look at his bio. He's first cousins with Moses, the richest man to ever live, and that ever will live.
Richer than Shlomo?
Yeah. He has a beautiful family. He has children. He himself was a great Talmid Chacham. He was a great scholar. He knew a lot, especially when you start digging into the behind the scenes, esoteric says, what went on over here. Whoa, this guy really knew a lot. Take it now another step. He experienced something. He was from an exclusive elite group, even amongst the Levites. Remember, the Levites were divided into 3 groups. One group, their service called for them carrying the boards, transporting the boards, the heavy lifting of the tabernacle. Another group was already, you could say, a step higher, a step above. They carried the tapestries, the curtains, the more elevated part. Then there was the children of Kohath. They transported the actual artifacts which stood inside the tabernacle, such as the altar, the menorah, and so on. And the most exclusive, elite group, which is only numbered very few, they carried the ark. Their job was to transport the ark. Now you can imagine, that in itself tells you, whoa, the Ark of the Covenant. They get to transport it, to carry it. But there was something so special about it. Whereas all Jews experienced tremendous miracles when they crossed the sea, when they left Egypt, at Mount Sinai. But imagine the human condition, sometimes things wear off. You forget. You conveniently allow yourself to forget. They could never forget miracles. You know why? Because the ones who carried the ark, it tells us, the Talmud tells us, Ha'aron, the ark, nosei et nosav. It carried its carriers. So those who carried it, they were like, oh, no. It carried them. They floated in the air. Maybe that's where the magic carpet idea comes from. It's all, typically all taken from the Torah. All a perversion of true stories in the Torah or in the Midrash. Now, to add to all of that, if that's not enough, so far you're like, that would be it. For me, I would be so happy, I'd be so content, all that you just described it. I don't even need to own half of the world's wealth. A couple $1 million, I'm fine, I'd be very happy. He also had the power of prophecy. He had prophetic vision. In fact, Rashi even comments, quoting the Talmud, quote, what is it that drove him to do this? What is it that he saw that he thought that he was invincible? In other words, anybody already by this point knows You stand up against God, you stand up against Moses, you question, they started, they did the golden calf, they sent the spies. What is it that gave him that sense of invincibility, that I'm going to win?
Pride.
Stupid he wasn't. But pride is not enough for a rich person to want to lose everything, to gamble everything. In fact, I'll tell you something very interesting. Speaking to a friend, a guy who has a business, he's developing it, who knows where it's going to go. God willing, he's okay, he's doing well, but it can go very big. And he once told me, he says, I don't want to be that big. Why not? And he told me, he says, from the people that he knows, I'm talking about, he has some friends from Israel who really made it big. He's talking about, he says they live a paranoid life. Mm-hmm. The worst thing they have, and what they constantly think about, and they cannot stop, is scared to lose it all. Mm-hmm. So they have less of a fulfilled life and a good life than he said you and I have sitting at the same table. Even though he wants to have more, we all want to have more, but it's not. But so understand that fear should have stopped him and should have quenched his pride. That should have subdued any ego that he has. And the answer is, he had prophetic vision. He saw in the future that there were large groups of prophets. And the greatest amongst them, the famous, one of the most famous prophets, the prophet Samuel, Shmuel Hanavi, from his direct lineage. So he said to himself, if that's the case, nothing bad's going to befall me, because how will they come out of me? How would they be my descendants if, God forbid, I'll be punished? If, God forbid, this will fail? Little did he realize that perhaps he may be punished. Many other members of his family may be punished. But it's enough that one son or two sons are spared, which in fact is exactly what happened. Later, as we learn in the Parsha, where they were all swallowed into the ground, what does it say? That two of his sons repented. That last crucial moment. And it says Hashem made a special place for them. And they emerged, at the end of the 40 years, they emerged alive. And they joined all the Jews and they entered Israel. And from their descendants came the prophet Samuel and so many other prophets. He was blinded by his pride. So he didn't properly interpret this prophecy. But I'm not dwelling on that. I'm dwelling on the fact that he also, on top of everything, he had all the material good. He had an amazing lineage, amazing experience spiritually, and he was somebody who definitely dabbled in prophecy, and yet he made such a big mistake. Why? How? What does it teach us? Sadly, he wasn't grateful enough. What you were referring to was true. His wife wasn't maybe grateful enough, and she was like, you should be that too. I think you should be happy with what you have. It's not like you don't have anything. I mean, it's quite different than coming to a kid who's in a poor family, and you give him a new backpack and a new pair of sneakers, and you should really be happy with what you have. It's still a challenge, you know? It's just a challenge. He's going to go home to a house which maybe has broken furniture, paint peeling on the walls, and even so, you still encourage him or her, be happy with this little you have, and then you'll have more, but be grateful. Here he had everything. Beyond the imagination, and he lost it all because he wasn't grateful enough and he was looking for more. And that's a very important lesson. So when next time you say thank you for what you have, even though you have a lot of complaints, and we all do, and you're worried about this and about that, and I'm the first one. I'm the best example, at least from you, maybe even worse than anybody would imagine here. I'm not being happy about this, but at least when you are happy about something, try to be fully happy. Mm-hmm. Try to be grateful. Try to really, really feel it at least for one moment. So that one moment of gratefulness will compensate for many, many hours even of complaints, many hours of worry, many hours of discontent, because gratefulness is a very, very powerful midah, a very, very powerful attribute. And that's sadly something he was lacking. Anyway, there's so much more to talk about in this Parsha, but we have to stop at some point. Any questions, any comments, any observations, what we spoke about?
So we can safely say that his sin was ungratefulness.
I mean, the actual sin that he did was to create machloket, to create discord, and to. It wasn't the gospel. It was to outright create the argument, the discord against Moshe. What was the reason for it? In other words, what was the root of this disease, of this cancer? It all goes back to ungratefulness.
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
And actually, it shows us something very powerful. That even somebody who's so great in wisdom and in everything and so righteous could go wrong. Could go wrong. Can make a mistake.
Absolutely.
And that is really sad. But the happy side of it, the good part of it is that, like I said, just the little gratefulness. And that's why there are times in the day when maybe even we don't necessarily instinctively feel it. We need a prayer book to tell us to say the words. But even that alone is so therapeutic and so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's such a antidote for the bad, for that inner desire that we all have to feel a little miserable, to feel a little bad, to feel a little like, oh, I don't have enough. We all have that in us. Come on, I don't know about you, but I know I have it, right? So that, even though it's regimented, and even though it's the same words we say every day, and maybe we don't always really fully pay attention to it, but look how powerful gratefulness is, that even when we don't pay full attention to it, even though we're not really meditating on it properly, it's still enough to help us compensate for that. It's almost like, when you have, people who work in certain environments that are maybe not the most healthy ones, but then they're always advised to be later going to a park, breathing fresh air. It kind of clears up your system a little bit. That's enough to help compensate somewhat, and it does a good job. So for the many hours of negative feelings, you have that 1 hour of the prayers, a half hour of the prayers, that helps to clear up your spiritual lungs, if I may.
Yes, indeed.
Okay? Well, the truth is, the best thing we should have, Hashem should give us so much, in such obvious good, that even our evil inclination should lose its desire to be ungrateful. Amen.